Hello, everyone, and good evening to you all, or good afternoon, I guess, if you're in the West Coast, right? I'm Josh Farrell. I'm your host, wine director for Wine Express, joined today by team members Erica Silberstein, Marshall Tilden, Gino Crecco, and we're going to taste a couple of nice Bordeaux. So I hope you all like Bordeaux. I really like Bordeaux. Bordeaux is near and dear to my heart. It's probably the first wine I ever really latched onto and decided I needed to really get to know. And working at Windows on the World, Kevin Zraly was a huge Bordeaux fan. He worked for the Bordeaux Bureau for many years, giving lectures, and we would have all kinds of Bordeaux producers come in and do tastings with us. It was a fantastic experience. And, probably the most famous, well-known wine producing region in the world. I mean, if you say Bordeaux to anybody, even if they don't really know much about wine, they pretty much know that that's wine, right? I don't think I've ran into anybody who never heard of Bordeaux. And one of the great things about Bordeaux, one of the many great things, is that there are wines that are incredibly fantastic and stratospheric in price, and then there are wines that are absolutely everyday priced that are also really fine, really good quality. Over 7,000 chateaus in the region. And so, you can pretty much find something that you're going to like, no matter where you go, no matter what you're looking for. So the wines we chose today are three that we're offering on Wine Express that have been really popular, and we think deliver lots of quality, and particularly for the money, great value. So just wondering, does everybody have these wines, or you're gonna taste along with us? I see a hand, I see another hand, I see some hands. All right, good. Makes it fun, makes it a lot more fun. One thing you're going to notice about these three wines is they're all from the 2016 vintage, which was a very, very high quality vintage in Bordeaux. Bordeaux wines generally are released about 2 years after the vintage. So 16 is a vintage that's been around for a while. But because there was ample quantity, in addition to the very high quality in the 2016 vintage, that we're still finding these wines around, which is great. And the additional bottle age that these wines have been able to acquire just really adds to their complexity and just makes them so much more fun to drink. And it's one of the things we love about Bordeaux. So 2016 was overall a very warm year, which was really good. So you didn't have frost affecting the vines in the wintertime. You didn't have a lot of hail. And then the other issue was that you had rain at the right time. Because if you get rain in the summertime or in the fall, it can cause problems in a vintage. You didn't have that. You had the rain during the wintertime so that it soaked into the soil. The vines got to drink up lots of nice water. You had warm weather during the summer, not too hot most of the time. And then a little bit of a cooling in the fall, which extended the ripening, so the grapes got to hang longer, take on a lot of nice nuance, and retain all that good acidity that gives the wines that nice brightness and the good balance. And yeah, again, large quantity to go along with this really, really good quality. So let's get to our wines, huh? We're going to start with the Chateau Bellevue, which is a wine from the Médoc. So I think we have a little map here we can show you of the Médoc.
If you're looking up at my screen at all, if you can see me, it's up over here of my my left shoulder is the
Gino, do you have the Médoc map?
Yes, let me share my screen.
So let me ask, yeah, so this is Médoc, and there's a river, the Gironde comes in from the Atlantic. Actually, the river flows out to the Atlantic. And so the Médoc is sort of a peninsula, kind of hangs between that river and between the Atlantic Ocean. And so it gets it actually gets a warming effect from these bodies of water. And so the Médoc region is actually a slightly warmer region than the right bank regions, which are attached really to the mainland. So, and because it's a river valley, it's actually an estuary. You have a mix of soils that are alluvial. So what that means is you're going to get a lot of gravel in the soils. You're going to get a lot of clay in the soils. You'll find that in the Médoc, there's more gravel than clay. And on the other side, you're going to get more clay than gravel. And so that's going to have a lot to do with what kind of grapes you're going to plant and what kind of grapes are going to do best there. That's good, Gino. I just wanted to ask if anybody in the group has been to Bordeaux. Do I see any hands?
Someone said it's on my list.
Yeah,
It's on your list. It should be on your list because it's really quite a beautiful region. I've been there a couple of times, and it's I mean, it's amazing. You know, it's very close to the coast, and so if you're there in the summertime, you can go to the beach, and the beach there is quite beautiful. But the vineyards are also amazing. There's beautiful rolling hills, and the river is amazing. You can actually take a ferry across the river, and then there's these incredible chateaus just all over the place. It's really kind of a magical area. So if you get a chance, yeah, head over there. So what I was saying about the soil was on the left bank, which we refer to the regions of Bordeaux broadly as left bank, right bank. When we talk about left bank, we're talking about Médoc. We talk about right bank, we're talking about Emilion and Pomerol and all the other regions on that other side of the river. So because there's gravel in the soil and because it's slightly warmer, a lot more Cabernet Sauvignon is grown there. Because Cabernet Sauvignon needs that warmer climate. It takes a little bit longer to ripen, and the gravel in the soil is good for the roots in Cabernet. Those roots go deep. They like that gravelly soil where you get good drainage. The water drains through, and the roots reach down deep to get their water and their nutrients. So, but as I say, there's a mix of soils. So some properties have some clay mixed with that gravel. So this one, you've got 50% Merlot actually. So they've decided, they figured out that their soils are better matched to Merlot in many places, but then they've got 45% Cabernet Sauvignon, 5% Cabernet Franc, which also does well in a slightly cooler climate, ripens earlier. So, but it's about half and half Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. They age in oak barrels, of course. And here's something sort of interesting. I don't know if you've ever seen this on a wine label. On the bottom of this label, it says élève en fût de chêne. And that means aged in oak barrels. They use the term élève, which translates really to raised. They talk about how wine is raised after it's fermented. So how they raise it is whether they put it in barrels, whether they age it in cement tanks, whether they age it in bottle. So that's the raising of the wine. And if you ever see that élève en fût de chêne, it means that they've aged it in oak.
And that term élevage, right, is just
Right,
pertains to all of that.
To raise up.
To raise up, exactly.
So this wine is a Cru Bourgeois, which is a classification of Bordeaux wines that is a cut below the the 1855 classification. Are we familiar with the 1855 classification? Some are, some aren't. So in
Let's go through
1850,
it, Josh. Yeah.
sure, 1855, they were going to do the World's Fair in Bordeaux, right? And so, of course, Bordeaux was already a thriving wine-producing region. And so for the fair, they wanted to create this classification of the Bordeaux chateaus that were, at that time, very popular and producing quality wines. So they went through and they made these 5 classifications: first growths, second growths, third growths, fourth growths, fifth growths, basically based on the Bordeaux merchants' determination of the quality of those wines. And they at the time they said, well, we want to do this just for the fair, and it's going to get people to more make Bordeaux more popular, give people a little more information about Bordeaux, get it out there, and it's not really going to be official. And so what happened, of course, is it became very official. And so now those classifications are still in place, and you still see them on wine labels, and it still affects the price points of these wines. So wines that are in the classification are pretty much a much higher price level than other Bordeaux wines, simply because they were chosen in that classification in 1855.
And you can notice those on the labels, like Josh was saying, on the bottom of this label, they'll say Grand Cru Classé. They won't say which of the growths it is, but when you see something that says Grand Cru Classé, it's one of those premier classification wines.
Exactly, and sometimes it'll give you the number. It'll say deuxième or troisième for second or third or whatever. And so most of the wines, actually, all of the wineries except for one were located in the Médoc. And the one that wasn't in the Médoc, anybody want to guess? Anybody ever heard of Chateau Bellevue? Very famous first growth Bordeaux that was located in at the time, the Grave, or what is now the Pessac-Léognan. And it was included, even though it wasn't in the Médoc, simply because it was already considered to be one of the greatest Bordeaux wines. So all the rest are from Médoc, and all of the Cru Bourgeois wines are also from the Médoc. Mostly family-owned properties, small properties. They have to go through a blind tasting of 5 vintages to get selected. There's about 250 Cru Bourgeois. So. Got the wine in my glass. Starting to catch these aromas.
Yep.
Ooh, and I'm liking it. So, yeah, right away you get those nice black currant or cassis notes, right? And then there's that little hint of those fût de chêne. You get that little toastiness from the oak. That really just marries so nicely with those black currant, blackberry, cherry notes. Mm. Let's take a sip. Yeah, so one of the great things about drinking a wine in 2021 that was produced in 2016 is that most of the tannins have had time to soften, and the wine has a real supple quality to it. That's what bottle age does for your wine. That's why you need a wine cellar.
Right.
Those bottles, put them in the cellar, let those tannins unwind, and you get this really nice silky quality. The fruit on this wine is still quite vibrant, I think.
Yeah. I agree.
You get that nice little toasty oak note. Is there a little bit of, what do you think, Marshall? Is there a little bit of minerality also?
Yeah, it's got that nice kind of chalky, that people say that lead pencil, right? That little graphite kind of note to it, you know. I like
Absolutely.
the
Go ahead.
I was gonna say it's got a really nice perfume note to it also, right? This that just jumps out of the glass on the nose, and
Yeah, no,
it's
the
very,
aromas were coming right out of the glass.
very pretty
You
one.
didn't need to swirl.
Right.
Again, that's also part of the aging that does that, because it just lets the wine unwind. Of course, aerating the wine is also important. So, I mean, I opened these up about a half an hour ago, and the oxygen helps bring out those flavors and those aromas.
That's a lot of why you'll see everyone constantly swirling glasses. If you're ever wondering why, it's somewhat because it's cool. They just constantly swirl a glass, but there is a purpose behind it that just gets really maximum amounts of oxygen and aeration to that wine, which helps just all those aromas and complexities, you know, jump out of the glass.
Yeah, let your wine breathe.
Yeah. Great finish.
Yeah,
Right.
finish hangs around. It's nice.
We
You
have
know-
a question, Josh. Is it okay? There's a question
Sure.
from Lou. It says, how do you know how long to let a wine age?
Yeah, that's the age-old question.
Yeah.
And the answer is you have to judge that based on what you know about the wine and the wine region and the vintage. And sometimes even all of that will fail you. So, you know, what a lot of people recommend is if you're going to buy a case of wine and save it, is that you taste it right away, see where it's at, and then you taste it in 6 months and see where it's at, and then if it's not ready, then taste it in a year and keep going back. But, you know, that being said, know that this is a Cru Bourgeois wine. It's not a classified growth. So we can pretty much guess that it's not going to be a wine that, you know, you have to lay down for 20 or 30 years to really, you know, see it evolve. You know, you figure a wine like this is going to come around in, you know, 3, 5, 8 years and, you know, show its stuff over about 10 years, right? And then maybe start to fade a little bit.
Yep.
But it's really kind of a question of, you know, what you know about the wine to begin with.
Yep. And then a lot of it just has to do with like levels, right? The higher levels of tannin and acid and fruit concentration and all these things that might be very, you know, big and powerful up front start to, I saw someone said balance. They start to balance each other out. The acid starts to balance with the tannins and the fruit, and then they evolve and they age. And the other age-old question is, while it might be able to age 10 years, are you going to like it as much? Because in 10 years, that fruit's going to fade and you're going to get a lot of earthiness and mushrooms and tobacco and all these, and the fruit gets a little dried instead of fresh. So it might evolve over 10 years, but you might come back to it in 10 years and say, man, I wish this had more fruit.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I like I like how the flavors evolve in older wine. I like those really nice dried cherry notes, those baked cherry notes, those you know, the perfume that comes out, that's sort of the exotic spice.
Yep.
Some people prefer a wine that's just kind of right in their face, fruity, with a little bit of tannic bite.
Yeah.
So, you know, at the same time, it's really a question of what you like when you're going to enjoy your wine.
And then also, Josh, wouldn't you say there's some categories that are just not really made to age for the most part? You know, like, I don't want to do too broad strokes, but like New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc or something like that. It's just kind of, you want to drink it right away.
Well, yeah, of course. And certainly white wines are much different than reds. I mean, for the most part, you're not going to age your white wines, at least not very long. And yeah, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc ain't going to age at all. Yeah, and there are red wines, you know, fruity California reds that you're going to want to just enjoy that nice bright fruit when it's young. You don't necessarily want to age it and, you know, hope that it's going to take on a lot of nuance, because probably it won't. But yeah, when you're talking about something like Bordeaux, that's a wine that you can age pretty much no matter what the what the quality level is. It's gonna evolve over a couple of years, sometimes several years, sometimes many years. So do we like this wine? I see some nods. Good.
Let's drink it really nice. Yeah.
Like
Let's drink it really well.
I think for the price, I think this wine really delivers.
Old world age better than new world wine? That's a good question. I don't know if it ages longer. It'll age differently. That was a question, Josh. Does old world wine age better than new world wine? You know, a lot of it has to do with the soil too, and the quality of the grapes. So some, you know, Napa cabs that are, you know, made with really, you know, concentrated fruit, high acid, high tannins can go just as long as these, you know, Grand Cru Classé Bordeaux.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, again, I think it comes back to the question of how you like your wine. You know, because a lot of New World wines have a lot of really nice upfront fruit that people enjoy when the wines are young. You know, a lot of Napa Cab drinkers, you know, they're buying their wines and they're drinking them. They're not necessarily aging them that long. Yeah, but sort of traditional for Old World wines to age. Mostly because if you think about Old World, well, you think about Bordeaux, it's a little bit of a cooler climate than say Napa Valley. So the wines are not going to have as much fruitiness up front because they don't get quite as ripe. So that's why you want the wines to age a little bit so that the tannins recede a bit and some of that fruit is able to emerge. Whereas in California, you got all the bright sun, you got lots of ripe fruit, so you can drink the wines young. But even those wines, if they're good wines, they'll evolve very interestingly and rewardingly over time. So do we want to jump to the right bank, anyone?
Sure.
Okay.
Do you want to just jump on a quick food pairing, Josh, before we go to the next one?
Go ahead, Marsh.
Well, I guess we're talking about Bordeaux in general, right? So part of wine, a big part of wine is what foods are going to pair well with it, what's going to complement one another. And again, a lot of that just goes back to balance, right? You need hearty foods that are going to stand up to hearty wines. A lot of times with Bordeaux, because they have these tannins, they need some protein, something that's got some fat that's going to bind with those tannins to make the wine feel even softer and smoother and more lush on the palate. So, you know, there's some. Go ahead, John. Sorry.
No, I was going to say that's exactly right.
Yeah.
You know, a wine like this, it's more supple and subtle, maybe than a younger wine, and so maybe you want to pair this with a food that's not as robust. You know, yeah, it'll go with a steak, but you probably don't want to put a spicy sauce on the steak.
Yeah.
Maybe it pairs better with a roast beef, au jus, something like that.
This feels like a lamb wine to me.
Well, or lamb, sure. Sometimes a good aged Bordeaux takes on those earthy nuances that goes great with mushrooms.
Yeah.
Truffles, that kind of thing. You're making me hungry now.
I know. So, well, that's the point, right?
All right, so we're going to jump to the right bank. And actually, so we're going from about half Cabernet Sauvignon to the next wine, which is from the Fronsac region. And this one's actually 100% Merlot.
I see that.
And there's kind of a little bit of a misconception about Bordeaux. Whereas we think about Bordeaux, we think about the great chateaus like Chateau Latour and Chateau Mouton Rothschild, Chateau Lafite Rothschild, and those wines are big Cabernet Sauvignon based wines. And Cabernet Sauvignon is kind of the king over on the left bank. And really that's the reason that Cabernet is planted in the New World, because everybody said, wow, it makes great wine in Bordeaux. Let's plant it over in California. Let's plant it in Argentina. Let's plant it in Australia. So we think about Bordeaux and we think about Cabernet Sauvignon. But the fact of the matter is, the number one grape in Bordeaux is Merlot, because most of the rest of the region is much more conducive to Merlot. And Merlot is planted all over the right bank. And why is that? Because it's slightly cooler, and Merlot is a slightly earlier ripening grape. And also because the clay soils are very conducive to Merlot. Clay soils retain water, and so the roots for the Merlot don't have to go very deep. They can get that water from the clay soils, soak it up. And it's a cooler soil. So with this earlier ripening grape, the cooler soil helps balance the ripening, and just really does much better. Lets those grapes ripen slowly, take on the nuance that you want, and still give you that nice backbone. Fronsac is a beautiful area, lots of hills, lots of little valleys, just really gorgeous. And this property has nice hillside vineyards, sort of a little bit of elevation. So there's some cooling effects from the height. And then you have the fog that rolls down into the valleys that cool things down. And then you have the sun that comes in. You know, you get, well, there's some interesting effects of, what's the word, Marsh? Disposition, exposition, for how the vineyard is laid out.
The aspect.
Yeah, so the aspect is very interesting in that, you know, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. So if you're on that right bank, you're going to get a lot of that late afternoon sun. And the late afternoon sun is warmer than the morning sun because the air is already warmed up. And so that sun hanging in the sky, and you've already got the warm temperatures in the air, it's going to give those grapes some really nice ripening effect. And yeah, that's what you get over there in Fronsac and Saint Emilion. But this wine actually has a sub-name of Les Terres Rouges, the red earth, and that's the clay soils, or that red earth, where this Merlot does so well. So anyway, enough talk. Let's smell.
I'll share a map while you guys are tasting.
Great
You
idea.
can see that.
Nice.
That's there. See, it's a property that's much further inland from any of the rivers. So that's also means that it's going to have a much cooler climate. You know, those waterways actually act as sort of warming aspects to the vineyards. So again, that's why Merlot is so significant there, because it ripens much earlier. But you can get an idea of like how large the region of Bordeaux is from this map. It's how spread out it is.
Yeah.
You know, if you go to, you see you've got the Gironde, and then it splits into the Dordogne, which is the river to the north, and the Garonne to the south. And there's in between that area is the Entre deux Mers, between two regions, and there's a lot of little chateaus there. But then, of course, as you get closer to the Dordogne, you find a lot of the Sauterne wineries are there, because the river brings in that fog that comes over the vineyards and creates the conditions for the botrytis that makes those really sweet grapes for Sauterne. So anyway, back to the wine. What do we smell here? I get a really nice, bright, sort of almost a strawberry note of it.
Yeah, definitely a lot of red fruit.
A lot of red fruit. Strawberry, red cherry. This one's got a little hint of oak. It's not quite as overt.
Yeah, the oak comes out almost a little bit more like a cigar tobacco thing too.
Yeah, maybe.
You know, cigar box.
Cedar.
Cedar, yeah. Yeah.
All right, let's taste. So, very different from the first wine, right? What I know what I'm getting. What is anybody else getting on this?
Yeah, feel free to unmute and share.
And chime in.
Yeah. Only if you want to.
Well, what I'm going to say is what I really like on this is the really nice, bright acidity.
Yeah.
I mean, my mouth is watering from this wine. And that's also part of the fact that it's from this cooler area in Bordeaux. So the grapes are ripening more slowly. They're retaining that really nice acidity, and it gives you that mouth-watering quality. And it gives kind of a brightness, kind of lifts up the fruit flavors. So you get the strawberry notes that kind of linger. So this one, I get a little bit more bite of tannin from this one, interestingly. And just a sense of this, sort of a more youthful sense of this wine.
Yeah, I get an sort of a deeper concentration of fruit also, right? It's a bigger wine. So someone was saying, New World and Old World, and this is obviously it's Bordeaux, and so it is technically an Old World, but a lot of these Bordeaux's are made in a little bit of a New World style when they can. And there's a lot of big fruit on this wine.
Yeah, a lot of fruit. And that's, then again, that's the Merlot, really speaking. You get those wonderful berry notes from Merlot, blackberry, raspberry. And it's really coming through on this.
And that's not as interesting in the first. So, and it's definitely a different style. I don't want to say different style, but the first was a little bit more elegant, had a little bit more pretty kind of perfume notes. This is a lot of fruit. Kind of the oak, Josh said. I think Erica and Dara said rubber. A lot of times if you smell rubber, sometimes it can just be a little bit of a sulfur that blows off too. And
okay, I thought, I was like, do I have a bad bottle? Am I a bad taster? Because it's so strong. So I keep trying to air it out.
Yeah. And most times it will air out. Most times it's, you decant, aeration, it'll come off. Sometimes, there are bad bottles.
Well, that brings up an interesting point, in that when wine is bottled, often they'll put a little dose of sulfur dioxide in the bottle right away to preserve it when they put the cork in.
Yeah.
Times that they put more than they should, and the bottles maybe will vary a little bit, but usually it's something you don't notice. Occasionally you do.
But this wine definitely benefited from a lot of air. I poured these out when we were, talking earlier about an hour ago, and I got a
Right.
little bit of a whiff of it at first too, and now it's really, really drinking nicely.
So to me, this is a wine that's going to pair with much different foods than the first wine. I'm even thinking, you're going to pair this with a sweeter meat, like a duck maybe, because it has all that nice fruit.
A lot of cheese comments going on in the chat
Oh,
here, Josh. A lot of cheese pairing.
Cheese is a great pairing with any Bordeaux.
Yeah. Very different. One of the cool things of tasting through this flight that Josh picked out is that it's all the same vintage, right? It's all Bordeaux, but different regions, in different grapes, you're going to have different styles. And, just from A to B, right? These two wines are, in terms of quality and even price point are really similar, but you're getting really different character, really different notes off of both of them. So much of it is grape, so much of it is region, climate. So, and then a lot of it, again, becomes personal preference, right? For me, the finish on this one is a lot longer, the fruit hangs on a little bit longer, right? So someone asked about aging. I feel like this wine will probably benefit a little bit more from a few years of bottle age, softening things out a little bit. Because I don't get as many tertiaries, I don't get as many like earthy or tobacco-y notes like I did from the first one. So,
right. Yeah. So one thing I didn't mention about when I was talking about the vines and the vineyards is the vine age. This wine comes from vineyards that average about 30 years of age, and mature vines are a really good thing for a number of reasons. The first reason that mature vines are good is that if vines age to that extent, then they've got to be really healthy vines. And healthy vines are going to bring good quality fruit. I mean, that's kind of number one in your vineyard. You want really good, robust, healthy vines. But mature vines also, in addition to being healthy, they also will be less robust in terms of the amount of fruit that they produce. They'll produce a little bit less in quantity, and that will lift the quality of the fruit. The fruit will have a little more concentration and a little more complexity when you're getting fruit from older mature vines. So that's how you get good concentration in your wine, as you get these good mature vine fruit grapes, and again, healthy, but also they bring that little bit of additional concentration to the whole process. So in Bordeaux, what they do is they sort of rotate the vines in that, they'll take a small section, and if the vines are really particularly old, or if they see some vines that are maybe not as healthy, they'll do a replanting. And then so each year they'll look at a section of vines and they'll replant, so that overall they'll still have an average of pretty mature vines, but they've got new vines coming on that are going to be replacing older vines that maybe are not as healthy and maybe not hanging on as well. And sometimes, depending on how many vineyards they have, how many blocks of vineyards, how much grapes overall they're producing, they might do a second wine that's only made from the younger vines, and they'll just use the mature vine fruit for their Grand Vin. That's something that's pretty common in the classified growths. So, off on a little tangent there. So we like this
Erica's
one.
asking if the first wine, do you feel like the tannins are significantly higher in the first wine than the second?
I didn't. but I definitely feel that the fruit is more subdued. Again, I get more dried cherry than sort of bright cherry, and a little bit lower acidity in the first wine. So you don't get that lift. And that's, that's because it's right bank, it's warmer, it's more cab, more backbone. So yeah, I mean, the tannins are definitely there. But they seem pretty balanced to me. But very different, right? Two Bordeaux wines, 2016 vintage, completely different wines. Very, very interesting. I hope you're finding it interesting.
And like Josh said, the first wine is a blend, which is more common than not in Bordeaux. It's
absolutely.
Usually not just a single varietal wine, and so this being all Merlot makes it pretty interesting. So one thing actually,
go ahead.
I was going to say, the first wine had Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, and Merlot. That's 3 of the 5. Does anyone know what the other 2 grapes, if they wanted to use in a blend in Bordeaux, that they could use? Anyone have any guesses to venture? Gino, please don't answer. Actually, Gino, maybe you should answer.
Petit Merlot and Malbec.
Ah, yes.
There you go. Beautiful.
Very nice. Petit Verdot and Malbec. Good job.
Good job. Yeah. And, a couple of things about that. Okay, off on another tangent. So, we talk about wine and we talk about how, they age the wine in oak barrels for 12 months or 18 months or whatever the heck. And, it's all very easy to sort of sum it up like that. But what happens in reality, and in Bordeaux, this happens probably all the time because, as Marshall says, Bordeaux is usually a blended wine. There's usually 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different grapes in the wine. What the winemaker will do is they'll ferment the grapes separately and they'll age the grapes separately. So they'll take the cab and they'll put it in barrels maybe for 18 months, and maybe the Merlot will only go in for 12 months, and then they'll blend it all together. And so you have wine that's aged, an average of, whatever months that we sort of sum up. But it's, it's a much more complex process than that. And the other thing is that in the left bank, you can grow all of those 5 varietals pretty well. Most wineries will focus on Cabernet because Cabernet is it's great stuff and it makes fantastic wine. But the fact that you have these other grapes gives you a hedge when your vintage isn't perfect. So if your cab all doesn't ripen up that great, you can still blend in some of that Merlot, you can blend in a little of Petit Verdot, you can throw in a little Malbec, and you can still make a dynamite wine. On the right bank, it's a little bit tougher to grow all of those grapes, so pretty much what you see is Merlot and Cabernet Franc. But again, they work with those 2 grapes, and depending on the vintage, they're going to use more or less of one of the 2 for most of the time. The fact that this wine in 2016 is 100% Merlot really says that it was a great vintage, and the Merlot turned out so fantastic they didn't really need to do anything else to it,
right,
and just use that grape. So.
Yep.
Anyway, we got one more wine here. And this is the Chateau Bellevue in the Grand Chemin. So that is a separate and unique bottling from the Chateau 2016, where they're using some of the older vines. And this wine is a Emilion Grand Cru. And I'm going to clear up another misconception for you. Usually we think about Grand Cru as a sort of a classification, as a designation. Certainly when you talk about classified growths. You think about Grand Cru, Premier Cru, or you talk about Burgundy, and they have Grand Crus and Premier Crus. In Saint-Emilion, unlike in those other places, the Saint-Emilion Grand Cru is actually the appellation. So it's just like Fronsac or Medoc or any of those other things, any of those other sort of place names that tell you where the wine is from. This wine comes from a chateau that's located in the Saint-Emilion Grand Cru appellation. It's definitely a good quality appellation, and you should definitely look for it because it tells you that the wine comes from a unique and good quality area. But it doesn't mean that it was rated and judged to be something all superior to other wines necessarily. If that was clear to everybody. Hope it was. So anyway, this one is a blend. And so again, we've got Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon. Actually, the Cabernet Sauvignon is down to 10% in this one. You got 70% Merlot, 20% Cabernet Franc, and 10% Cab Sauv. You got your aging in Fût de Chêne. But the aging, again, depends on the grape. So the Cab was probably aged longer than the Merlot or the Cab Franc. The winemaker determined how much of that oak aging the grapes needed and put it all together. So this smells good.
Yeah.
And this is different than the first two also. I get a lot more cherry in this wine.
You get more of those new oak notes too, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
This comes across more vanilla
Yeah.
than sort of toast or
Yeah.
cedar.
So just a note on oak, a lot of times oak is sometimes new and it's toasted, and sometimes it's used barrels and they don't toast it. And when it's new, you usually get those hints of like vanilla or coconut. Those are really the main two. Sometimes clove. And when it's a used barrel, you'll get more of that sort of toasty or sometimes a nutty kind of thing. And a lot of times they'll use a combination of new and used barrels to, get the style that they're looking for. But if you ever get that vanilla or coconut kind of note, chances are they used some new oak in the aging.
Yep. And the oak aging is sometimes done even in older barrels. So a barrel will kind of deliver flavors and nuance to a wine for about 3 or 4 years. And after that time, all of those nuances are sort of gone from the barrel, and it just is a neutral container. And so wineries will still age sometimes in those, or very often in those neutral barrels, just to get the wine to soften. It gets a micro amount of oxygenation in those barrels, but it doesn't get all that sort of toastiness and vanilla and all those nuances that you get from a newer oak barrel. That's another thing that the winemaker has to determine.
Yep.
Whether they need more of that, less of that, what kind of combination works.
This has this nice little minty, right? That little eucalyptus kind of kiss to it also, which I really like on this.
Yeah, there's that little bit of sort of a potpourri, right?
Yeah. Beautiful spice.
Did we taste this yet? Everybody's way ahead of me, right?
Just me and you, Josh.
So interestingly, I get more of the oak on the palate than on the nose.
Yeah.
I got a little hint of that sort of that clove note. Kind of came through with the cherry, the black cherry, and a little bit of that sort of I don't know if it's mint exactly. It's more like a sassafras.
Yeah, it's like got root beer kind of
Yeah.
flavor coming through on the
Little of
palate.
that comes through on the palate, right?
Yeah, it does.
It's interesting nuance.
Yeah.
I like that. So tannins again, tannins very supple, pretty soft.
Yeah.
Saint Emilion is going to be a little bit riper than Fransac, and so you're going to get a little bit of the lower acid in this wine, but still good balance.
Yeah, and the balance is for me. I was just laughing at Lou's comment that
What do you say?
they were glad they didn't invite their friends for this tasting because then they would have to share their wines. Is the balance on this wine to me is what gives it such a beautiful texture. And we're talking about flavors and aromas, but texture is so important. And that acid that because the acid on this is still fairly high. This is still Saint Emilion, somewhat cool climate, but the tannins are they're polished, like you said. They're really supple, but they're there, and that balance of acid and tannins on this wine gives us just a beautiful structure and a texture on the palate.
Mouthfeel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, we haven't really talked specifically about mouthfeel, but that's a very important and fun aspect to wine. It's just how it feels on your palate. That's what I was getting in the Trou de Moulin. I got that really bright acidity, really sort of tingling everything. This one is a little more creamy, a little more lush.
Yeah.
So how do we pair this one?
Yeah.
You maybe compare it with something with a creamier sauce. Definitely a good cheese wine for sure.
Good cheese wine. For sure. This also feels a little bit bigger, maybe a little bit bolder too, where you could start to go to some meats, some grilled meats as well. Could probably stand up to it.
Yep. That's what that little bit of oak does for it too.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I can do my favorite piece of cheese dipped in porcini mushroom powder.
There you go.
That's like the umami bomb. Such a great pairing with any red wine. But I think would be really good with this.
And whoever asked about aging wine, one of the things, and it is just experience, and it is about regions and tasting. But one of the ways you can tell if a wine can age is the length, right? When a wine hangs on like this does, and not just because of its drying factor in the tannins, but the fruit hangs along with those tannins in the drying, that's usually a pretty decent sign that you got something that's going to age nicely for a few years,
And Annette was pointing out that she'd like to visit this in another year or two.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, absolutely. This is definitely a wine that can rest in your cellar for another couple of years.
Yep.
And again, maybe some of you like it now. Some of you like the fact that the fruit is really still kind of bright. Another couple of years, and it's going to probably take on more nuance, more complexity, softer. The fruit will change. It'll be more dried, more baked. Again, matter of taste. Yeah. I like them both ways. So what's the favorite? Anyone think this last one was a favorite? Okay, I got a hand.
Gotta vote for one.
And
Yeah, I like one.
number 2 was a favorite. Number one, anybody?
Yeah, Dara likes one.
Oh, Dara likes one. Yeah.
Wendy likes the Fransac. Did you get any tertiary notes on any of these wines? They all taste pretty fresh to me. Erica asked if any of them had any tertiary. I'd say if any of them had any tertiary, probably the first one. I'd have to go back to it again.
Marsh, can you explain what tertiary is?
Yeah.
Yes.
That would be important.
Sorry. So wines from an aroma and a flavor standpoint have primary aromas and flavors, secondary and tertiary. Primary is all from the grapes. So it's the fruit, it's the spice, it's the floral notes. That's your primary. Secondary is from the aging process, from oak aging, from other élevage techniques, from other things that have to do with the post wine with oak barrels. It could be in Chardonnay. It could be lees when they stir the lees. So it could be something yeasty or biscuity. So that's secondary.
Right,
So
let me interrupt. I'm sorry. Yeah, lees aging is kind of a technique in wine where you sort of let the wine rest on the yeasts that have created the fermentation to sort of fall into the bottom of the barrel. And the yeasts have their own little flavor characteristics, and they can also add texture to a wine. So yeah, so that's a secondary flavor that can come to a wine that has nothing to do with the grapes themselves.
right. And that's where secondary comes in. And then tertiary is bottle age. So when the wine is now aging in the bottle and the fruit starts to develop and kind of loses its freshness, goes towards this baked or dried sort of character, you start to develop those mushroom and earthy and leathery and kind of tobacco-y, right?
Yeah.
And so that's bottle age. So that's tertiary. So to be honest, I didn't get too many from 2 or 3. The Fransac and the Gravet still feel pretty fresh to me. The Bellevue, I think, had a little kind of that cigar box kind of cedar, but nothing overtly tertiary. Everything's still pretty fresh across the board. And that's the sign of a really good vintage on 5-year-old wine that, we're kind of searching for tertiary and it's not hitting you in the face, right?
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Whereas if these were, 13s or 14s, we'd get nothing but tertiaries.
Right. Looking for fruit.
Or 13s or 12s, maybe. 14s are pretty.
Yeah. 13s for sure.
When you guys say that, you mean because those vintages are not as strong as 2016,
Yes,
right?
exactly. Yes.
Which is a really interesting reason why sometimes, Josh and I will taste through wines and we'll bring something in for that reason. We had a 2013 Saint Emilion Grand Cru that was almost all tertiary. It felt like it was fully aged. It was developed. It had gotten all to that point where the fruit was baked in those dried character, and you didn't have to age it. It was ready. If you like aged wine, it was perfect.
Right, and the wine held together well.
Right.
The quality of the flavors and are all still there.
Yep.
Whereas, a lot of times if the wine is not that good quality and it's not a good vintage, then the wine will really just kind of fall apart and just won't be interesting at all.
But you won't find any of those here, so don't worry.
Yeah, right. No, we stay away from those.
So as you guys have questions, one thing I just want to point out is this is pretty sort of indicative of the Bordeaux that we like to bring in, because we know that our customers and Bordeaux lovers enjoy these kind of wines. They're great values. These are wines that are not really out there in the market, and we sample through a lot of wines to find some great values that, if they were known labels, would be a lot more. And we're always looking for a high QPR, right? A really high quality price ratio, and that's really the goal.
Yeah, I mean, you can always buy a classified Bordeaux and spend a lot of money and get a good quality wine, but if you can search around and you can find a good Bordeaux that's from a small chateau that's not classified, you might find a gem that's really, really good value. And that's what we're always looking for. And there's a lot of them there, because as I say, there's 7,000 chateaus. And a lot of them are good.
Any more questions? I thought that was a really good tie-in to the top of the show about the 1855 classification and what that means.
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that those can be more expensive. Anything else? Any other questions from our customers and viewers before we finish up tonight? Thank you so much for everyone for joining.
Yes, thanks very much. This was a lot of fun. Really appreciate it. You joining us.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Glad
guys.
you
Thanks for
enjoyed it.
joining us. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for
everybody.
coming.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas.
Sure. We had a good time. Thank you.
Oh, I'm glad. Thank you. This was fun. Nothing
All right,
like a
have great night, everyone. Happy
virtual
holidays.
tasting.
Yeah.
Night, everybody.
All right.
Right.
Take care, guys.